Lines are everywhere. They're in the world around us. You can see them just about anywhere you go. And they're in nature. Think about trees, for instance. Japanese cherry blossom trees have beautiful lines. So today, we're going to make our own Japanese cherry blossom tree. There are lots of different supplies you can use for this project. As you can see, I have paints, markers, crayons, but even if all you have is a piece of paper and a pencil, you can still do this project. I'm going to use a white piece of paper and a blue piece of paper. You're only going to make one, but I'm going to make two and show you how. So I'll start with a blue piece of paper, and since it's a darker paper, I'm going to start with a darker marker to make my tree. I'm going to start with a nice big Y shape. And then I'm going to make a bunch of little V's for the branches. Just Y's and V's. That's how you draw a tree. If you have watercolor paints, you can use your finger to make a stamp. You'll paint some watercolor on the tip of your finger, make sure it's nice and wet, and then use your finger to stamp cherry blossoms all over the branches. You can also dip your finger right into the paint like I did. If you don't want to use paint, that's fine. You can use some crayons. For instance, I'm using a white crayon right now because it showed up pretty well on the blue paper. And to make cherry blossoms, I just did tiny little scribble circles, as you can see. I also tried a pink crayon and it didn't show up very well, but that's fine. So there's one way to make it on a blue piece of paper with paint. You can also make it on a white piece of paper, and if you don't have markers, you can still draw it with a regular pencil. And the process is the same. You draw a Y, and then a bunch of little V's to make your branches. Now if you look closely, you can see that I'm making my branches and tree trunk even thicker by drawing lines next to the first lines that I drew to make it look like thick branches. I'm also going to do something called scumbling, which is basically just a fancy word for little scribbles. You can also see I did some swirly, curly line cherry blossoms as well. If you've got a pencil and no colors, you can make your tree really fun and interesting with just a pencil. You can also use a brown crayon or a black crayon or brown markers or black markers. Depends on what you have, but all of it's fine. Now if you don't have paints but you still want to use your finger as a stamp, you can get a piece of plastic, saran wrap, a little baggie, scribble on that plastic with your marker, get your finger a little bit wet in some water, rub it around in the marker, and then stamp your finger all over the branches to make pretty little cherry blossoms. See, I'm using red and pink markers. I scribble on the baggie or the plastic, rub my finger in it, and I stamp cherry blossoms all over the tree branches. You can also use your markers to just draw little cherry blossoms on your tree as well. Markers, crayons, colored pencils, anything you have is just fine. And that is how you make cherry blossom trees with various materials that you have and some lines.